We are in Chapter 5, Part 2, which is cost curves. You might notice I'm wearing the same outfit as last week. That's because I'm knocking it all out in one day, which is probably a terrible idea, but I feel like when I'm deep in this headspace of diminishing returns and stuff, I just like to stay here for a while. So we are discussing cost curves today. And to be honest with you, cost curves is the most boring thing I teach. And when I was teaching at Skidmore College, I remember I went out for drinks and dessert with this colleague of mine, Maeve. And I said, "Oh, today was rough. I was teaching cost curves. It's just the worst." And she said, "Oh, really? I love cost curves." And I said, "Oh, okay." She's like, "No, I really love cost curves." And she bends over and she has a tattoo of cost curves on her back. I did not know what to say. And to this day, my biggest regret is not looking to see if she labeled them on her skin. So that's the only fun thing that we can do with cost curves is tell that story. And I did Google cost curve tattoo before I recorded. No such luck. And I actually met one of her classmates from grad school, and I was like, "Oh, Maeve, weird question, but did you ever get a look at that tattoo?" She had not. So we are talking about the cost function, and basically this is the mathematical relationship that relates cost to the cost minimizing associated with an isoquant, which you don't need to know. It's basically talking about the opposite of product. Okay, so it's costs. So if you're really productive, your costs are low. If you're not productive, your costs are high. So let me just introduce, we've got fixed costs and variable costs. Fixed costs do not change with changes in output, and that includes the cost of fixed inputs used in production. So it's like rent. If I was to rent a store for, a storefront for a restaurant or something, I have to pay the same amount of rent no matter how many outputs I produce. Variable costs change with outputs. So if I rented a storefront as a restaurant, variable costs would be the wait staff. It would be like the meat that I would purchase, right? So if I'm selling a lot of product, then my variable costs would also increase because I'm buying more meat. And then we've got total costs, which is fixed costs plus variable costs. And then again, in the long run, we have no fixed costs. All costs are variable. So to relate this to what we did last week, so we were really focused on increasing returns, diminishing returns. Diminishing returns is associated with increasing marginal cost. So it's the same concept. So it's really important to understand diminishing returns. And when we do, we can understand all of this stuff better. All right, this is from another textbook. Basically, when we're using the short run cost function model, we assume there's only two inputs, labor and capital. We're in the short run. The firm produces a single product. There's a fixed level of technology. The firm operates at every level of output in the most efficient way. This is actually kind of important. The firm operates in a perfectly competitive input market. So like if you think about Walmart in a small town, Walmart's got market power with how much it can pay people. This is the opposite. Like the firm does not have any power over the price of the inputs. And then we've got diminishing returns. All right, so this is the total cost function. I really don't care much about this one. It's not super useful, but we can see here that fixed costs do not change as the quantity of output changes. And then we've got total cost, which is equal to fixed cost plus variable cost, which is why they're parallel. I'm not going to ask you about this. I'm going to focus much more about average and marginal costs. So these are the cost curves that she has tattooed on her body. All right, so let's just define average fixed cost is the total fixed cost over the quantity produced. Average variable cost is the total variable cost over the quantity produced. Average total cost is the total cost over the quantity produced. And then we keep using marginal, right? We're not going to stop using marginal. It's the additional cost of producing one more. If I produce one more unit of pizza, how much do my costs increase? All right, so I actually have a worksheet here. So again, I find that when we're doing something where the details are this important, I like to use worksheets. worksheets. So pull that up and give it a try if you are willing to do so. All right, so the first thing we need to do this worksheet is to use this table that I've posted. So I've left everything blank I could possibly leave blank so that you have to think through some things. Total fixed cost, if you produce 1 is 100. If you produce 2 is 100, 100, 100, right? So it does not change as much as you produce. So I would never fill this in for a student because I like that they have to make this connection in their head. Total variable cost, let's do a common sense check. Does this increase as the total number of units increases? Yes, it does. Total cost is equal to total fixed cost plus total variable cost. Okay, so it's total variable cost plus 100. Makes sense. Now let's start doing the averages. Average fixed cost, you take total fixed cost divided by the quantity. And we can see that as quantity increases, the average fixed cost decreases. This is called spreading fixed costs. So like if I had that restaurant and I'm paying rent for it, the more food I sell, the lower my average fixed cost is going to be because I'm spreading it over more food. I must be really hungry. All right, average variable cost is equal to total variable cost divided by the quantity. Let's look at this. So what happens to average variable cost? It decreases and then it increases. Why is that? Because of increasing returns followed by diminishing returns. That's the only reason. So our average variable costs are going to go down as we're more productive in the beginning, and then as we produce more, we're going to hit diminishing returns. Average total cost. Let's take total cost divided by quantity. All right, now what happens to this? It decreases and then increases. So why does average total cost decrease? Well, because of two reasons now. We've got increasing returns and we're spreading the fixed costs. So there's two reasons that decreases. Then eventually we hit diminishing returns, and that overtakes the fact that average fixed costs are still dropping so that it eventually increases. So marginal cost is just the change in total cost from producing one more. So we can see marginal costs decrease and then increase. Why is this? Because of increasing returns followed by diminishing returns. So there's a lot going on here, right? So this is why it's really helpful to ask students every step of the way what's going on, which is why when I gave you the table, I left most of it blank. All right, so then let's go to this worksheet. We're looking at the cost curves. Which curve is likely average fixed cost? It's the green one. Why? Because as quantity increases, it's the only one that consistently decreases. Which curve is likely the average variable cost curve? This is where I lose students because they know this one might be and they know this one might be. So you have to think, well, average total cost is greater than average variable cost, so it must be this middle one. Which one is average total cost then? It must be the top one. All right, after sloping down, both the average total cost and average variable cost curves increase. This is usually I would use these sheets of paper in class. How does this relate to our experiment? Diminishing returns, like we talked about. Why does average fixed cost have the shape that it does? Because you're spreading fixed costs as you produce more. My camera appeared to be frozen, and if I have to record this lecture again, I'm not going to like that, so I paused it there. All right, now we think about the marginal cost curve. Definition of a marginal cost: change in total cost over change in quantity, or as you produce one more, how much does your total cost change? Which shape will the marginal cost curve have? Well, we know it's going to decrease, and then we know it's going to increase. If the marginal cost of production is greater than average total cost, what will happen to average total cost? This is the same concept as average product, total product. If marginal cost of production, the additional cost is higher than the average, it brings up the average. If it's lower than the average, it brings down the average. So where must they cross? They cross at the minimum. So I ask students to attempt to draw in a marginal cost curve. And if you were to do this, it would actually it looks like a Nike sign. I once had an athlete in class, he said, that's a Nike sign. And it's going to cross this at the minimum, and it's going to cross this at the minimum. Okay, so I'll show you a better one on my slides here. So we've got the average total cost, average variable cost, and average fixed cost. We see the marginal cost curve here is going to cross them at their minimums. So some textbooks, including some you may use, do not have the average fixed cost curve in it. And the reason is average total cost minus average variable cost is average fixed cost. So the distance between these two curves is the average fixed cost. And you can see how they get closer together as quantity increases. So this is always something I tell my students. I expect you to know how to draw this. So, and I'll tell you the same thing. If I'm ever asking you to draw cost curves, which I probably will at some point, I'll be looking for these details. Let's see here. So again, the marginal cost curve crosses at their minimums, okay? So I have some comprehension questions for you. Why does average fixed cost decrease? We just talked about it. Why does average variable cost decrease and increase? Average total cost, we've just talked about these. Why is the minimum average variable cost to the left of the minimum of the average total cost? Because we're still experiencing the impact of spreading the fixed costs, okay? So diminishing returns set in right here. But we still have like the impact of the reduction in the average fixed costs. So this happens to the right of it. Note that average total cost is equal to average variable cost plus average fixed cost. And then again, note the relationship between marginal cost and average total cost. If marginal cost is greater than average total cost, it brings it up. If marginal cost is less than average total cost, it brings it down. Wow, that is a lot with cost curves. I think this is a good place to pause so that you can review your notes if you would like. But all of these concepts are things that every chance I get, I'm going to review with you again and again. Let's do a common sense check. Does the marginal cost curve have the proper shape? Does it cross at the right point? Do these two curves get closer and closer together, etc.?